December 30th, 2025, Cook County Courthouse, Chicago, Illinois. Case number 26CR019501. After 113 days of waiting, after 113 days of a family screaming for justice, after 113 days of a killer walking free, the documents are finally out. September 8th, 2025. A mother drops her son off at school. Minutes later, she's dead on the pavement, shot in broad daylight, witnesses everywhere. The shooter was arrested immediately, and then released. For 3 months, Chicago watched as Romeca Meeks' family buried their daughter while her killer went home. For 3 months, the question burned in everyone's mind. How do you murder someone in front of a school and face no consequences? Until now. The indictment is filed, the documents are public, and what they reveal is exactly what they tried to bury. This is the story of justice delayed, justice denied, and justice that a community refused to let die. The documents are out, and it's time you saw what's inside. Case number 26CR019501. Filed December 30th, 2025 at 2:47 p.m. in the Criminal Division of Cook County Circuit Court. Let me show you what's inside, and more importantly, what took 113 days to get here. The header reads, The People of the State of Illinois versus Quadajah Johnson. Case number 26CR019501. Calendar 2038. Date filed December 30th, 2025. Division, Criminal Division. The charge, first-degree murder, not manslaughter, not second-degree murder, not involuntary homicide. First-degree murder, the most serious charge in Illinois criminal law, and it spells out exactly what the state believes happened. On September 8th, 2025, outside a South Loop Elementary School in Chicago, Illinois, the defendant, Quadajah Johnson, allegedly caused the death of Romeca Meeks Blackman by shooting her with a firearm, resulting in fatal gunshot wounds. The language is clinical, legal, precise. But behind every word is a mother who died on pavement while dropping off her son at school. First-degree murder in Illinois means the prosecution must prove 3 elements. 1. Holly Johnson caused Romeca Meeks' death. 2. Holly intended to kill Romeca or cause her great bodily harm. 3. Holly knew her actions created a strong probability of death or great bodily harm. If convicted, Holly faces 20 to 60 years in prison, possibly natural life. There is no possibility of probation for first-degree murder in Illinois. No house arrest, no ankle monitor. Prison, period. The document lists the next court appearance, January 7th, 2026, 9:00 a.m., assignment call, Judge, Honorable Erica L. Reddick. Location, Courtroom 101, 2650, South California Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, 62608. An assignment call is procedural. It's where Holly will be formally arraigned on the indictment, where she'll enter her plea, almost certainly not guilty, and where the court will set a schedule for the long road to trial. The document also confirms Holly's current status, held without bond since December 4th, 2025. That means she's been in Cook County Jail for nearly a month now. No bail, no release. Too dangerous, the judge determined. Too much flight risk. But here's what these documents don't tell you. They don't tell you why it took 113 days from trigger pull to indictment. They don't tell you why Holly walked free for 3 months while Romeca's family buried their daughter. They don't tell you what happened in those first hours that let a killer slip through the system's fingers. Let me give you the timeline. September 8th, 2025. Romeca Meeks Blackman is shot and killed outside an elementary school in Chicago's South Loop. The shooter, Quadajah Holly Johnson, is arrested at the scene. According to reports, the murder weapon was recovered. Witnesses were present. September 8th, 2025, later that day, Holly Johnson is released. No charges filed. She walks out of the police station and goes home. For the next 3 months, September, October, November, Holly Johnson lives her life. She's reportedly under investigative alert, meaning she can't leave the area. But she's not in jail. She's not charged. She's free. September 15th, Romeca's funeral. Her family buries her while Holly walks the same streets. October passes. The family reportedly calls the police daily. When will charges be filed? The answers are vague. Investigation ongoing. November passes. Public pressure starts building, rallies, protests, media attention, still no charges. December 4th. Finally, movement. A detention hearing. Holly appears in court. The prosecution argues she should be held without bond. The judge agrees. Holly is jailed, but still no formal indictment. Not yet. December 30th. The indictment drops. 113 days after Romeca's murder. 113 days of her family wondering if justice would ever come. And now, 6 days from today, on January 7th, 2026, Holly Johnson will appear before Judge Reddick. She'll hear the charges read aloud. She'll enter her plea. And the machinery of the criminal justice system will finally start turning in earnest. These documents represent the end of a 113-day nightmare for Romeca's family. But they also represent the beginning of something else, a trial, a reckoning, and the revelation of evidence that prosecutors spent 3 months gathering, evidence that would dismantle every excuse, every claim, every lie Holly's defense constructed. But to understand why these documents matter so much, you need to understand what happened on September 8th. And I mean really understand it. Not the sanitized version, not the self-defense story Holly's lawyers spun. The truth. And the truth starts with a school drop-off that should have been routine. September 8th, 2025. A Monday morning in Chicago's South Loop. Romeca Meeks Blackman has one task that morning: drop her son off at school. She never makes it back home. It's a Monday morning. The kind of morning that happens a million times across America every single day. A mother getting her child ready for school, breakfast, backpack check, shoes on. Hurry up, we're going to be late. Romeca's son is young, still in elementary school. For a child that age, Monday morning means seeing friends, starting another school week, the simple routines of childhood. There's no indication Romeca expects anything unusual that morning. Just a normal Monday. Drop off her son. Start her week. Romeca and her son head to the South Loop Elementary School. It's a familiar scene to anyone who's ever been a parent. Cars lined up for drop-off. Kids with backpacks. Crossing guards managing the morning chaos. Teachers greeting students at the entrance. Other mothers and fathers doing exactly what Romeca is doing. It's safe. It's public. It's surrounded by adults and children, and the routine infrastructure of a Monday morning at an elementary school. And then something changes. According to reports, both Romeca and Holly Johnson, the woman who would shoot her, were at the school that morning. Also present, Carlos Smith, the man who connected them both. Carlos had children with both women, creating a custody arrangement that meant these three people's lives were inevitably intertwined. What happens next has been pieced together from witness accounts, though the exact details vary depending on who's telling the story. A confrontation erupts. 2 women, years of tension, a shared connection to the same man, and in a school parking lot with children nearby, that tension explodes. The argument escalates. Witnesses would later describe raised voices, heated exchanges, the kind of confrontation that makes other parents stop and pay attention. Romeca's son is reportedly still in the car. Other children are being walked to the school entrance, their parents likely trying to shield them from whatever is happening. And then comes the moment that changes everything. Holly Johnson reportedly produces a firearm in a school zone during morning drop-off, with parents and children everywhere. Shots are fired. Romeca Meeks Blackman, 31 years old, mother, daughter, sister, falls. The chaos that follows is immediate and overwhelming. Parents screaming, people calling 911, children crying, the school going into lockdown mode, and Romeca, bleeding, dying, on the pavement of a school parking lot while her child watches. Emergency responders arrive, but it's too late. Romeca Meeks Blackman is pronounced dead at the scene. The crime scene is secured. Yellow tape goes up. Witnesses are gathered for statements. The murder weapon is recovered, and Holly Johnson, still at the scene, is taken into custody. Police arrest her immediately. The evidence is overwhelming. Eyewitnesses, the murder weapon, the victim dead at the scene. This should be open and shut. Holly is transported to the police station. She's arrested for murder, or so it seems. By the end of the day, she'll walk free. And that's when this case stops being a straightforward murder investigation and becomes something else entirely. A story about systemic failure, about justice delayed, about a family's 3-month nightmare. Because within hours of Romeca's death, police had a suspect in custody, a murder weapon, and witnesses who saw what happened. Open and shut case, right? A conviction by dinner time? What happened next would shock everyone who thought justice in America works the way it's supposed to. Holly Johnson was arrested for murder on September 8th. Later that same day, Holly Johnson walks out of the police station. No charges, no court date, free to go home. How? Holly is brought to a Chicago police facility for questioning. This is standard procedure for a homicide investigation. The suspect is separated from the scene, brought to a controlled environment, and interrogated. Holly is read her Miranda rights. She has the right to remain silent. Anything she says can and will be used against her in a court of law. She has the right to an attorney. If she cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for her. And here's where the case takes its first turn. According to reports from the very beginning, from the moment police start questioning her, Holly claims self-defense. She came at me. I was afraid for my life. I had no choice. This is the narrative that would define the next 113 days. Because in Illinois, self-defense is a legitimate legal defense to murder. If a person reasonably believes they are in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, they have the right to use deadly force to protect themselves. Illinois is a stand-your-ground state. There's no duty to retreat if you're somewhere you have a legal right to be. And a school parking lot during drop-off? Holly had every legal right to be there. She was there for custody-related reasons involving Carlos Smith and their shared child. So when Holly tells detectives, "I was defending myself," they can't just dismiss it out of hand. They have to investigate. They have to determine whether her claim has merit. But here's what investigators would have known, even on September 8th. According to reports, there were multiple eyewitnesses: parents, teachers, school staff, people who saw the confrontation, who witnessed the shooting. They had the crime scene, forensic evidence that would eventually show exactly where each woman was positioned. Whether Romeca had any weapon on her person, they had the murder weapon, a firearm recovered at the scene that would be traced and analyzed. So the question becomes, with all this evidence already in hand, why do prosecutors decline to charge Holly on September 8th? The official answer in cases like this is typically, we need to investigate further. We need to build the strongest possible case. The reality is more complicated. Prosecutors are cautious. They don't want to rush to charge someone if they think the case might fall apart later. They especially don't want to charge someone and then have a judge throw out the case because they didn't properly investigate a self-defense claim. Self-defense cases are tricky because once a defendant raises self-defense, the burden shifts to the prosecution to disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a high bar. And if prosecutors can't meet that bar, a guilty person walks free. So the assistant state's attorney assigned to review Holly's case that day makes a decision. Don't charge yet. Let detectives investigate further. Interview all the witnesses, get forensics back, build an airtight case. And Holly? She's released on what's called investigative alert status. Technically, she's not free. She's not supposed to leave the Chicago area. She has to stay in contact with investigators. But she's not in jail. She's not charged with a crime. Later on September 8th, Holly Johnson walks out of the police station. The public doesn't know all these details. What they know is simple. A woman was murdered in front of a school. The shooter was arrested. And then the shooter was released. The media reports it exactly that way. Woman killed at school drop-off, suspect released without charges. Romeca's family is devastated. They've just learned that their daughter, their sister, their loved one is dead, shot to death in a school parking lot. And now they're being told that the woman who killed her is going home. They don't understand. How is this legal? How does someone shoot another person in front of witnesses and not get charged? The police try to explain. It's an ongoing investigation. The state's attorney needs more time to build the case. But to a grieving family, it sounds like an excuse. It sounds like the system is failing them. The days crawl by. Romeca's family is planning her funeral, picking out a casket, writing an obituary, trying to explain to her young son why his mother isn't coming home. And Holly Johnson? She's living her life. She's with her own child. She's sleeping in her own bed. She's walking the same streets, shopping at the same stores, existing in the same world as the family whose lives she shattered. September 15th. Romeca's funeral. Hundreds of people reportedly attend. Friends, family, community members. The grief is palpable. A 31-year-old woman, dead too soon, leaving behind a young son who will grow up without his mother. At the funeral, Romeca's family makes their first public statement. Standing in front of news cameras, raw with grief, they reportedly say, "We demand justice. We will not stop until we get justice for Romeca." It's the beginning of something, a movement, a campaign, because the family is starting to realize that if they want justice, they're going to have to fight for it. September turns into October. Still no charges. The family reportedly calls the police department daily. Any updates? When will charges be filed? The answers are maddeningly vague. The investigation is ongoing. We're working on it. These things take time. But how much time? It's been a month. A month since Romeca was murdered in front of witnesses. A month since her killer was arrested with the murder weapon. And still nothing. The question that haunts everyone. Why is this taking so long? Here's what we know now looking back. Behind the scenes, investigators were working. They were interviewing witnesses, getting statements, and building a timeline. They were waiting for forensic reports, ballistics, autopsy results, toxicology. They were analyzing the self-defense claim, looking at the history between Romeca and Holly, trying to determine if there was any evidence to support Holly's version of events. And crucially, they were preparing a grand jury presentation. Because in Cook County, for a first-degree murder charge, prosecutors typically present the case to a grand jury for indictment. That process takes time. Coordinating witnesses, organizing evidence, making a compelling presentation. But the public doesn't know any of this. Romeca's family doesn't know any of this. All they know is that time is passing and the woman who killed their loved one is free. October passes, November arrives, and the family makes a decision. Waiting isn't enough. Hoping the system will work isn't enough. They need to make noise. They need to apply pressure. And that's when the real fight for justice begins. Her name was Romeca Meeks Blackman. To the courts, she's the victim. To the media, she's a headline. But to her family, she was irreplaceable. And to understand the full weight of what was stolen on September 8th, you need to know who she was. Romeca was 31 years old when she died. Born and raised in Chicago, she was reportedly a daughter who maintained close ties with her family. A sister who showed up for family gatherings. A friend who was there when people needed her. But most of all, she was a mother. Her young son was the center of her universe. Everything she did, every decision she made, was reportedly filtered through one question: what's best for my child? Those who knew her describe a woman who was devoted to her child, who made sure he was cared for, attended to, loved, who showed up to school events and was present in his life. Those are the moments that define a life. Not the dramatic ones, not the headline-making ones, the quiet, ordinary moments of love. Romeca worked hard. She had goals, dreams, plans for the future. She wanted to build a good life for her son. People who knew her describe a woman who was strong, who didn't back down, who advocated for herself and her child, who navigated difficult situations with determination. But she was also human. She made mistakes. She had flaws. She had a complicated relationship history, including with Carlos Smith, the father of her son. Romeca and Carlos had been together for several years. Their relationship was reportedly complicated in the way many relationships are. They had a child together, which meant that even when the romantic relationship evolved or ended, they were forever connected through co-parenting. Co-parenting with an ex is hard under the best circumstances. Add in another woman, Holly Johnson, who also had a child with Carlos, and you have a recipe for tension. How did Romeca feel when she learned that Carlos had another child with another woman? Based on what typically happens in these situations, she likely felt betrayed, angry, but also resigned to reality. The child existed. The relationship existed. And Carlos was going to be part of both families, whether anyone liked it or not. Romeca tried to make it work, because she had to. For her son. Custody arrangements meant she had to coordinate with Carlos, which sometimes meant being in proximity to Holly. And that's where the trouble started. The exact timeline of when Romeca and Holly first interacted isn't entirely clear from public reports. But what is clear is that there was tension. Two women who had children with the same man. Two women forced into each other's orbits because of shared custody. Were there confrontations before September 8th? According to reports, yes. The nature of those conflicts, whether they were arguments over drop-off times, disagreements about schedules, or accusations about who was putting the children in the middle of adult conflict, has been the subject of investigation. Initial reports suggested that Holly's legal team claimed there was an order of protection, though verification of this claim became a key part of the investigation. What we know for certain is this. In the weeks before September 8th, Romeca was reportedly living her normal life. She was working, caring for her son, making plans. There's no indication she knew that September 8th would be different. No reported warnings, no ominous final messages. Just the ordinary life of a woman going about her day. And now Romeca will never have the future she was building. Never watch her son grow up. Never see him graduate or get married or have children of his own. All of that was stolen in a school parking lot. Justice can't bring her back. A conviction can't undo September 8th. But Romeca's family is determined that her death will mean something, that her killer will be held accountable, that her name will be remembered as more than just a victim in a case file. Romeca Meeks Blackman. Say her name. Remember that she was a person, a mother, someone who mattered. And understand that what happened to her didn't happen in a vacuum. There's context, history, a complicated web of relationships. And at the center of that web, there was a man, two women, one man, one dead, one facing life in prison, and him, walking free, raising his children, living his life. But make no mistake, this story doesn't happen without Carlos Smith. Who is Carlos Smith? According to the information available, he's the father of children with both Romeca and Holly. He's the connection that binds these two women's lives together. He was present at the scene on September 8th, 2025, and he's not charged with anything, not arrested, not sitting in a courtroom facing a judge. He's a witness in this case, nothing more. But ask those who followed this case how they feel about Carlos Smith's role, and you'll hear a different perspective. Because while he didn't pull the trigger, his position at the center of this triangle is impossible to ignore. The timeline isn't entirely clear from public reports, but we know this. Carlos had a relationship with Romeca. They had a child together. At some point, Carlos also had a relationship with Holly. They had a child together as well. This created a situation where two women, both mothers of Carlos's children, had to navigate shared custody arrangements. That meant interactions, exchanges, inevitable encounters. And unless Carlos was handling this situation with extraordinary care and maturity, which the outcome suggests was not the case, there was going to be resentment. Think about the logistics. Custody exchanges. One woman drops a child off with Carlos. The other woman picks her child up from Carlos. Sometimes these handoffs happen at the same location. Sometimes they happen at the same time. And what happens when two women who both have connections to the same man cross paths? Tension, at best. Reports suggest there was indeed tension between Romeca and Holly. The nature and extent of that tension became a key focus of the investigation, particularly as Holly's defense team built their self-defense narrative. And Carlos? Where was he in all this? Was he trying to keep the peace? Was he mediating conflicts? Or was his handling of the situation inadequate to prevent the tragedy that eventually unfolded? There's a pattern that emerges in cases like this. A man who has children with multiple women, creating complicated dynamics that sometimes escalate into conflict. Whether through deliberate action or passive negligence, the man at the center often contributes to the volatility. This is not speculation about Carlos Smith specifically. It's a recognition of a pattern that appears in similar cases across the country. September 8, 2025. Carlos was at that school. The motive for the shooting is reportedly tied to the ongoing dispute between the two women who shared a child's father. Carlos Smith was present at the scene. When the confrontation erupted, what did Carlos do? His actions that morning, whether he tried to intervene, whether he de-escalated, whether he could have prevented what happened, will likely be examined as the case proceeds to trial. What we know is this: Carlos Smith was there, and his presence, or his actions, or inactions, is part of the story. After Romeca was shot, Carlos gave a statement to police. What exactly he told them hasn't been made public in detail, but his cooperation with the investigation has been noted. He's a witness. His testimony could be crucial, because Carlos is in a unique position. He can speak to the relationship dynamics, to the history between the two women, to past conflicts, to whether Holly ever expressed fear of Romeca, which is central to her self-defense claim. His testimony could support the prosecution's case. His testimony could support the defense. Which version he tells may shape the outcome of this trial. And here's the uncomfortable question: does Carlos Smith bear any legal responsibility for Romeca's death? The answer, legally, is almost certainly no. He didn't shoot her. There's no evidence he provided the gun. There's no evidence he conspired with Holly to commit murder. There's no evidence he knew Holly was armed that morning or that she was planning violence. So legally he's in the clear. But morally? Ethically? That's a different question. Some who followed this case argue that if Carlos had managed his relationships more responsibly, if he had maintained clearer boundaries, if he had prevented toxic conflict from escalating, Romeca might still be alive. But Carlos won't stand trial. He won't face a jury. He won't be sentenced to prison. He'll testify, and then he'll continue his life. And he'll continue to raise his children, including the child who reportedly witnessed his mother being murdered. How does a man live with that? How does Carlos Smith look at Romeca's son and not feel some measure of responsibility? How does he explain to that child years from now what happened and why? These are questions Carlos will have to answer for himself. The legal system won't hold him accountable, but the weight of what happened will be part of his story forever. 2 women, 1 man, 1 dead, 1 in prison. And him? Free. But freedom and innocence aren't the same thing. And while Carlos walks the streets of Chicago, while Holly sits in Cook County Jail, there's still the question of who Holly Johnson really is. Because the state says she's a murderer, but she says she's a victim. And understanding her side of the story, even if we don't believe it, is necessary to understand this case. So who is Quadajah Holly Johnson? And what drove her to that school that morning? Quadajah Johnson goes by Holly, 31 years old, mother, and according to the state of Illinois, murderer. But who is she really? And what led her to that school parking lot on September 8th? Holly is the same age Romeca was, 31. 2 women born the same year, living in the same city, connected by the same man. Parallel lives that intersected in the worst possible way. Holly grew up in Chicago. She reportedly has family here, people who love her and may be standing by her even now. She has a child with Carlos Smith, a young child in elementary school. From accounts that have emerged, Holly was a mother devoted to her child. Like most parents, her life likely revolved around school schedules, parenting duties, and building a future for her family. But there was another side to Holly's situation, the side that involved conflict, tension, drama related to the complicated custody arrangements with Carlos Smith. Holly's relationship with Carlos is complicated. From what can be pieced together from reports, they had a child together, creating a permanent connection between them. Whether they were in a committed relationship at the time of the shooting, Whether they'd broken up, whether the relationship was on again, off again. These details remain somewhat unclear from public information. What is clear is that Holly's life was intertwined with Romeca's because of Carlos. Two women sharing custody arrangements with the same man. Two women whose paths inevitably crossed. But Holly's defense team will tell a very different story than the prosecution. They'll say Holly was a victim, a woman who felt threatened by Romeca, a woman who lived in fear. According to initial reports, Holly's lawyers claimed that Romeca threatened her repeatedly, that the conflict between them was serious, and critically, that Holly had obtained an order of protection against Romeca. Is there an order of protection? That became a question investigators spent months verifying. Court records are public. If Holly filed for an order of protection against Romeca, there would be documentation. A petition filed with the court. A hearing. A judge's ruling. The verification of this claim became crucial to the case. Because if an order of protection exists, it lends credibility to Holly's claim that she genuinely feared Romeca. If it doesn't exist, if Holly fabricated this claim, it destroys her credibility and suggests she's willing to lie to support her self-defense narrative. But let's assume, for the sake of understanding the defense strategy, that there was genuine conflict between the two women, that heated words were exchanged, that the shared custody situation created ongoing tension. Did Romeca ever threaten violence? Holly's team would need to prove that. And not just that Romeca said something in anger, but that a reasonable person in Holly's position would have genuinely feared physical harm. That's a high bar, especially when the evidence reportedly shows that on September 8th, it was Holly who brought a gun to a school. Let's talk about that gun. According to reports, Holly had a firearm that morning. The weapon was recovered at the scene. When did Holly obtain it? If she purchased it days or weeks before September 8th, that could suggest she was preparing for a confrontation. If she'd owned it for years, the timeline is less clear. Holly's defense will likely argue she carried the gun for protection, that she feared Romeca and wanted to be able to defend herself if necessary. But here's the problem prosecutors will emphasize. If you're genuinely afraid of someone, you typically don't seek them out. You don't go to places where you know you'll encounter them. You avoid confrontation. Holly went to that school, reportedly for custody-related purposes, knowing Romeca might be there, and she brought a gun. That doesn't look like self-defense to prosecutors. That looks like preparation for violence. September 8th. When the confrontation started, when the argument escalated, Holly had choices. She could have stayed in her car. She could have driven away. She could have called police. She could have called out for one of the many adults present to intervene. Instead, she reportedly pulled a gun and fired. The details of exactly how many shots were fired, the specific circumstances, the positioning of both women, all of this will be part of the forensic evidence that prosecutors present at trial. After the shooting, Holly stayed at the scene. That's actually a point that could work in her favor. Legally, at least. People who commit premeditated murder often flee. Holly didn't run, but people who shoot in genuine self-defense often immediately call 911, desperately explaining, "She was attacking me. I had no choice. I was afraid for my life." What Holly did, in those immediate moments after the shooting, will be examined closely. When police arrived and arrested her, she went peacefully. And from the very first moment, according to reports, she claimed self-defense. That's her story. The 3 months between September 8th and December 4th, when Holly was free under investigative alert, must have been a strange time. She knew she'd shot someone. She knew that person had died. She knew there was an investigation. She knew charges might be coming. How did she spend those months? What was going through her mind? Only Holly knows. On December 4th, the situation changed dramatically. Holly was ordered to appear for a detention hearing. The prosecution argued she was a danger to the community and a flight risk. The judge agreed. No bond. Holly was taken into custody. Since December 4th, she's been in Cook County Jail, awaiting trial, separated from her child, living in a cell. And on December 30th, the formal indictment came down. First degree murder. Holly's legal team has a difficult job ahead of them. They need to convince a jury that their client, who brought a gun to a school, who shot another woman during a confrontation, who killed a mother, was acting in self-defense. Can they do it? In the American legal system, anything's possible. Juries are unpredictable. If the defense can create reasonable doubt, if they can get just one juror to think, maybe she really was afraid, they could win. But the odds appear stacked against them based on the known facts. The evidence reportedly includes multiple witnesses. The victim was reportedly unarmed. The setting was a public school during drop-off. Holly's best hope might not be an acquittal. It might be a plea deal. Plead guilty to manslaughter instead of murder. Accept a reduced sentence. Avoid the risk of life in prison. Would she take that deal? That depends on whether she genuinely believes she was defending herself, or whether she knows what she did was murder. Only Holly can answer that. And soon, very soon, she'll have to make decisions that will determine the rest of her life. But before we get to what happens next in court, we need to understand how we got here. Because the story of the 113 days between the shooting and the indictment is a story of community power, of a family that refused to stay silent, of a justice system that needed to be pushed to do its job. September 8th, Holly released. September 15th, Romeca buried, and every day in between and after, silence from the authorities. But Romeca's family, they weren't staying silent, and what they built changed everything. Week 1. September 8th through September 15th. The family is in shock. Their loved one is dead. The shooter was arrested and then released. They don't understand the legal process. They don't know that investigative alert is a thing. All they know is that Holly Johnson killed Romeca and then went home. The calls to the police department reportedly start immediately. When will she be charged? What's taking so long? Do you understand that our daughter is dead? The answers they get are bureaucratic, standard responses about ongoing investigations, about how these things take time. But how much time? A day? A week? Surely not longer than that. September 15th, the funeral. Reports indicate that hundreds of people gathered to mourn a 31-year-old woman whose life was cut short by violence. At the funeral, Romeca's family reportedly makes a promise. We will not stop until we get justice for Romeca. The local news covers the funeral. The story runs briefly, and then the news cycle moves on to the next story. But Romeca's family doesn't move on. They can't. Week 2 and 3, late September. According to reports, the family starts organizing. They hold meetings with friends, neighbors, community members who knew Romeca or who are outraged by the apparent injustice. The Yasher Justice for Romeca hashtag is born. A Facebook group is created. Romeca's story is shared. Her photos, her life, reminders that she was a person, not just a victim. The posts get shared. The story spreads beyond just Romeca's immediate circle. Week 4, late September into early October. Still no charges. The family's frustration is reportedly building. They're calling the state's attorney's office now, not just the police. The first organized protest reportedly happens. Dozens of people gather outside the Cook County State's Attorney's office. They hold signs demanding justice, demanding that Holly be charged. Local news covers it. The story gets a little more attention. But still, no charges. October. 1 month turns into 2. The social media campaign is gaining traction. The petition demanding that Holly be charged gathers thousands of signatures. The story catches the attention of true crime communities online. National attention starts building. Not mainstream national media yet, but it's spreading beyond Chicago. The protests, reportedly, get bigger. They march from the school where Romeca died to the courthouse. They hold candlelight vigils. Media interviews with the family become more frequent. It's been 2 months. 2 months since our loved one was murdered in front of witnesses, and her killer is free. How is that justice? The pressure is building. Politicians are being asked about it. The Cook County State's Attorney is being questioned by reporters. When will charges be filed in the Romeca Meeks case? The official response is still the same. We're building a thorough case. These investigations take time. But the public is running out of patience. November, 3 months. The movement has reportedly reached a critical mass. Hundreds of people are actively engaged in demanding justice. The story is being covered more widely. The largest protest yet reportedly happens around Thanksgiving. The message: we're thankful for community support, but what we really want is justice. Emotional interviews from Romeca's family go viral. The pressure on the state's attorney's office is immense. And behind the scenes, though the public doesn't know it yet, things are moving. A grand jury is being convened. Witnesses are being called to testify. Evidence is being presented. The indictment is being prepared. Early December, the family gets a call they've been waiting months for. There's a court date scheduled, December 4th, a detention hearing. It's not charges yet, but it's movement. It's progress. For the first time in 3 months, something is happening. December 4th. Reports indicate the courtroom is packed. Romeca's family and supporters fill every available seat. Media coverage is extensive. Holly is brought in. It's the first time many people have seen her since September 8th. She's in custody now. The prosecution makes their argument. Holly is a danger to the community. She should be held without bond. The defense argues for her release. She's not a flight risk. She has ties to the community. She's a mother. The judge listens to both sides and then makes a ruling. Holly Johnson is to be held without bond pending trial. Emotion fills the courtroom. Relief. Finally, some measure of accountability. Outside the courthouse, Romeca's family reportedly addresses the media. This is just the first step. We're grateful that Holly is in custody. But we won't rest until she's convicted and sentenced for what she did to Romeca. But even with Holly in jail, there's still no formal indictment. The actual murder charge hasn't been filed yet. The family has to wait a little longer. And then December 30th, the documents drop. The indictment is filed. Case number 26CR0109501. The people of the state of Illinois versus Quadajah Johnson. First-degree murder. It's public record now. The media obtains copies. The details are reported. And on social media, justice for Romeca trends. After 113 days, Holly Johnson has finally been indicted for the murder of Romeca. Meeks, the family's response is reportedly measured. Relief, yes. Gratitude, yes. But also exhaustion. It took 113 days. It should never have taken this long. But we're grateful it's finally happening. The community celebrates. Not because they're happy about a tragedy. Romeca is still dead, that doesn't change. But because the system, finally, appears to be working. And that's the story of how justice came to this case. Not automatically, not swiftly, but because a family refused to stay silent, because a community organized, because people demanded accountability. Would charges have been filed without this pressure? Maybe. Eventually. But would they have come in October? In November? In December? We'll never know, because the family didn't wait to find out. They fought. And they won, at least this battle. But an indictment isn't a conviction, and the real test is still ahead: first-degree murder. That's not a charge prosecutors file lightly. You need evidence, strong evidence. Evidence that proves not just that Holly killed Romeca, but that she intended to. And after 113 days of investigation, here's what prosecutors likely have gathered. Category 1. Eyewitness testimony. This is likely the foundation of the prosecution's case. Because unlike many murders, which happen in private, behind closed doors, with no one watching, Romeca's death happened in public, in broad daylight, at a school during morning drop-off. According to reports, there were multiple witnesses: parents dropping their kids off at school, teachers arriving for work, school staff managing the morning routine, people who saw the confrontation, who witnessed what happened. The prosecution likely has statements from witnesses who can testify about what they saw, whether they observed the argument, whether they saw who appeared to be the aggressor, whether they saw a weapon being produced, whether they heard shots. Crucially, witnesses can likely testify to whether Romeca appeared to be armed, whether she seemed to be attacking Holly or retreating, whether the physical evidence supports a claim of self-defense or contradicts it. That's potentially devastating to the self-defense claim. Because self-defense requires a reasonable belief of imminent harm. If witnesses describe Romeca as unarmed, not attacking, not physically threatening, where's the imminent harm? The prosecution also has Carlos Smith. He was present at the scene. His testimony will be crucial and complicated. What he saw, what he heard, what he can tell a jury about the dynamics between these two women, that could sway the case significantly. Category 2. Forensic evidence. The science doesn't lie. And forensic analysis in a case like this tells a very specific story. Ballistics analysis will show the trajectory of the bullet or bullets, where they struck Romeca's body, the angle, the distance. This can help reconstruct exactly what happened in those critical seconds. If the forensics show that Romeca was shot while facing Holly, that might be consistent with a confrontation. But if the forensics show that Romeca was shot while turned away, or while at a distance that doesn't suggest immediate physical contact, that could undermine the self-defense claim. The autopsy report confirms cause of death, gunshot wound or wounds. It documents the nature and extent of injuries. It can show whether there were any defensive wounds that would suggest a physical struggle. And crucially, the autopsy and crime scene analysis will confirm whether Romeca was armed. Based on reports, she was not. No weapon on her person. No gun, no knife, nothing. That's a massive problem for Holly's defense. Because how do you claim you feared for your life from someone who didn't have a weapon? Crime scene analysis reconstructs where everyone was positioned. Physical evidence, shell casings, blood evidence, the positions where items were found, creates a picture of what happened. All of this creates a narrative, and that narrative will either support or contradict Holly's version of events. Category 3. Digital and documentary evidence. We live in a digital world. Communications leave traces. Text messages between Holly and Romeca, if they exist, could show the history of their conflict. Did either woman make threats? Did Holly express violent intentions? Did Romeca say things that could be construed as threatening? Text messages between Holly and Carlos could show motive. Was Holly jealous? Possessive? Did she express anger about Carlos's continued connection with Romeca? Communications with friends or family could show Holly's mindset. Did she tell someone she was done with Romeca? Did she express thoughts that suggest premeditation? Phone location data could show Holly's movements before the shooting. Where was she in the minutes and hours leading up to the confrontation? Did she go straight to the school? Or did she drive around, possibly building up to what she was about to do? Internet searches on Holly's devices could be significant. Did she search for information about self-defense laws, about guns, about anything that suggests she was planning this encounter? And then there's the critical question of the order of protection. Holly's defense team reportedly claimed there was an order of protection against Romeca. Prosecutors will have investigated this thoroughly. If the order exists, it supports Holly's claim of fear. If it doesn't exist, if Holly fabricated this claim, it's evidence of dishonesty and undermines her entire defense. Category 4. The history between the women. Prosecutors will present evidence of the relationship dynamic. Were there prior conflicts? Police reports from earlier confrontations? Documented disputes? The investigation into whether an order of protection exists is crucial here. Court records are public and searchable. The truth about this claim is discoverable. Category 5. The weapon itself. When did Holly obtain the firearm? How long had she owned it? Why did she have it with her that morning? The fact that Holly brought a gun to a school drop-off is significant. Even if she had a legal right to carry the weapon, the choice to bring it to a place where children gather, where she knew she might encounter Romeca, suggests, to prosecutors, that she was prepared for violence. Category 6. Motive. Why would Holly want to kill Romeca? The prosecution's theory is straightforward. The ongoing dispute over their shared connection to Carlos Smith, romantic rivalry, custody conflicts, the elimination of someone she viewed as an obstacle. It's a motive that juries can understand. It's been the basis of countless crimes throughout history. Put all of this together: eyewitnesses, forensics, digital evidence, history, the weapon, motive, and you potentially have a strong case for first-degree murder. But the defense isn't going to surrender. They have their own strategy, their own narrative, and they're going to fight. First-degree murder. Life in prison if convicted. Holly Johnson's defense team has one job: create reasonable doubt. And their strategy? Self-defense. But can it work? Let's break it down. In Illinois, self-defense is an affirmative defense to murder. That means Holly's lawyers are essentially saying, yes, she killed Romeca, but it was justified because she was defending herself. To succeed with this defense, they need to show that Holly reasonably believed she was in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, and that her use of deadly force was necessary to prevent that harm. Here's the version of events the defense will likely present to the jury. Holly and Romeca had a history of conflict. According to the defense narrative, Romeca was aggressive, threatening. Holly tried to maintain distance, tried to co-parent peacefully with Carlos, but Romeca allegedly wouldn't let the conflict go. The defense claims Romeca made threats, specific threats of violence. They claim Holly documented these threats, that she went to authorities, that she obtained an order of protection. On September 8th, according to this narrative, Holly went to the school for legitimate custody-related purposes. She didn't seek out Romeca. She didn't want a confrontation, but Romeca allegedly approached her, aggressively, making threats, advancing on her. Holly felt trapped, unable to escape. Romeca was allegedly bigger, stronger, more aggressive. Holly feared for her life. She had her legally owned firearm with her, because the defense will argue she'd been warned to protect herself given Romeca's alleged pattern of threats. She drew the weapon and warned Romeca to back off, but Romeca allegedly kept coming, and Holly, in fear for her life, fired. That's the story the defense will tell. Is there truth to it? The order of protection claim is verifiable. Court records will show whether it exists, and if it doesn't exist, that entire narrative suffers a devastating blow. The witnesses will be cross-examined. The defense will try to find inconsistencies in their accounts. They'll question viewing angles, distances, the chaos of the moment. They'll suggest that witnesses couldn't see everything clearly. The forensics will be challenged. Defense experts might offer alternative interpretations of the physical evidence, and the defense will try to humanize Holly. They'll likely put character witnesses on the stand. Friends and family who will testify that Holly is a good mother, a peaceful person, not someone who would commit murder without justification. They might bring in a psychologist to testify about Holly's state of mind, about the cumulative effect of alleged months or years of conflict with Romeca, about how even a seemingly small confrontation can trigger a fear response when there's a history of perceived threats. It's not a hopeless strategy. Juries have acquitted defendants on self-defense claims before, even in cases that looked problematic to outside observers, but Holly's defense team faces serious challenges. Challenge 1. Romeca was reportedly unarmed. That's a huge hurdle. It's very difficult to convince a jury that an unarmed person posed a deadly threat requiring lethal force. Challenge 2. The location. A school parking lot, in daylight, with people around. Holly could have called for help. She could have driven away. She had options other than using lethal force. Challenge 3. Multiple witnesses potentially contradicting her story. If numerous independent witnesses say Romeca wasn't advancing aggressively, and only Holly says she was, credibility becomes a major issue. Challenge 4. The gun. Why did Holly have it with her? If she truly feared Romeca, why put herself in a situation where they'd encounter each other? Why not avoid the school entirely, or ask Carlos to handle all custody exchanges? The fact that Holly brought a gun to a place where she might encounter Romeca suggests, 2. Prosecutors, preparation for violence, not mere self-defense. Holly's best hope might not be outright acquittal. It might be a hung jury, 1 or 2 jurors who have sufficient doubt that they can't bring themselves to convict on first-degree murder. Or it might be a conviction on a lesser charge. Perhaps the jury doesn't believe it was premeditated first-degree murder, but they do believe Holly killed Romeca without adequate justification. so they might convict on second-degree murder or manslaughter instead. That would still mean prison time, but not life. Perhaps 10 to 20 years instead of 40 to 60. Would Holly accept a plea deal? If the prosecution offers manslaughter with a 15-year sentence, would she take it? That's a calculation she and her attorneys will make. Guaranteed 15 years versus the risk of life in prison if the trial goes badly, versus the chance, small but real, of acquittal if the trial goes well. These are the agonizing decisions defense, attorneys and defendants make in the months before trial. But before we get to trial, there's January 7th, the next court date, the next step in this long process. January 7th, 2026, 6 days from now. Courtroom 101, Judge Erica Reddick presiding. Quadajah, Holly Johnson will appear. And the next chapter of this case begins. What will happen on January 7th? It's a procedural hearing, an assignment call. Not dramatic like a trial, but important. Holly will be brought from Cook County Jail. She'll appear before the judge, likely in a prison jumpsuit, accompanied by her defense attorneys. The charges will be read aloud. Quadajah Johnson, you are charged with first-degree murder in the death of Romeca Meeks Blackman on September 8, 2025. How do you plead? And Holly, or her attorney on her behalf, will almost certainly say, not guilty, Your Honor. Even with significant evidence against her, that's the plea. Because this is America. And in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. The judge will set a schedule. Future court dates will be established. Pre-trial conferences, motion deadlines, discovery deadlines. A tentative trial date will be set, likely sometime in late 2026 or early 2027. These cases typically take 9 months to a year or more to get to trial. The defense might request reconsideration of the no-bond status. They might argue that Holly should be allowed to post bond and go home to her child while awaiting trial. The prosecution will argue against it, maintaining that Holly is a danger to the community and should remain in custody. The judge will likely side with the prosecution, based on the severity of the charge. Holly will probably stay in jail, and then the case will proceed through the long, methodical machinery of the criminal justice system. Pre-trial motions will be filed over the coming months. The defense will try to suppress certain evidence. They'll argue that particular witness statements should be excluded. They might challenge the admissibility of forensic reports. They might argue that searches were unconstitutional. Most of these motions will likely be denied, but it's worth trying from a defense perspective, because if you can get key evidence thrown out, you can potentially win the case before it ever gets to a jury. Discovery will happen. The prosecution is required to share all their evidence with the defense. Witness lists, lab reports, photos, videos if they exist, documents. The defense will review everything meticulously, looking for weaknesses, inconsistencies, anything they can exploit at trial. Plea negotiations might happen behind the scenes. The prosecution might offer a deal. Plead guilty to second-degree murder, we'll recommend 20 years. Plead guilty to manslaughter, we'll recommend 15. Would Holly take such a deal? That depends on how strong she and her attorneys believe her self-defense claim is. If they think they have a real chance of acquittal, she might gamble on trial. If they think the evidence is overwhelming and conviction is likely, she might take the deal. Romeca's family will be consulted on any plea negotiations. Victims' rights laws require that. Do they want to accept a plea? Or do they want to see this go to trial, with the possibility of a life sentence? That's an agonizing decision. A plea deal means certainty. Holly will be convicted and sentenced, guaranteed. But it also means potentially less time in prison than the maximum. A trial means the possibility of the maximum sentence, but also the risk of acquittal, or a hung jury, or a conviction on a lesser charge. If there's no plea deal, the case will go to trial, probably in late 2026 or 2027. Jury selection will take days, possibly weeks. Attorneys will question potential jurors extensively, looking for bias. The defense wants people who might be sympathetic to a woman claiming self-defense. The prosecution wants people who will be outraged by a mother killed at a school in front of her child. The trial itself will last weeks. Opening statements, witness testimony, cross-examination, forensic experts, closing arguments, and then the jury will deliberate. 12 people deciding Holly's fate. If they are convicted of first-degree murder, Holly will be sentenced to decades in prison, possibly life. If they are convicted on a lesser charge, Holly will still go to prison, but for less time. If they acquit, Holly walks free. And due to double jeopardy, she can never be tried again for Romeca's murder. If they hang, unable to reach a unanimous verdict, the prosecution can retry the case, or they can offer a plea deal. Whatever happens, it will be months or years before there's resolution. Before Romeca's family knows whether justice has been served, and even then, even if Holly is convicted and sentenced to life in prison, Romeca is still dead. Her son still doesn't have his mother. The hole in her family's hearts is still there. Justice can't fix that. It can only acknowledge it. Romeca's case is one story, but it reveals something bigger. Something concerning how we handle certain types of violence and about gaps in the justice system. And the questions it raises affect us all. Why did it take 113 days to charge Holly Johnson? That's the question that haunts this case. The official explanation is that prosecutors needed time to investigate, to build a thorough case, to properly address the self-defense claim. But it's worth asking, if this were a different kind of case, if the circumstances were different, if the people involved were different, would charges have taken 3 months? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But the question itself is significant. This case reveals potential gaps in the system. Gaps that can allow significant delays in charging decisions while prosecutors work to build what they consider strong cases. It reveals the power, and sometimes the necessity, of community organizing. Because without Romeca's family's relentless campaign, without the protests and petitions and media coverage, would the timeline have been different? We can't know for certain. But the fact that we must ask the question is telling. This case also reveals patterns we see in similar cases across the country. Disputes between individuals connected by romantic relationships. Custody conflicts that escalate. Tension that builds over time until it explodes into violence. What can we learn from these patterns? How might we prevent similar tragedies? Better intervention in high-conflict co-parenting situations. Resources for people navigating complicated custody arrangements. Counseling. Mediation. Tools to de-escalate before violence occurs. Better enforcement and verification of protective orders when they legitimately exist. And perhaps, examination of gun access in documented high-conflict domestic situations. When there's a pattern of serious conflict, should firearms be part of the equation? This case also highlights the impact on children. Romeca's son reportedly witnessed his mother's death. That trauma will affect him for the rest of his life. Holly's child is growing up with a mother in prison. That child will carry that burden. Carlos's children, from both women, are half-siblings connected by tragedy. How do they process this? How do they heal? We talk about the adults in these cases, but the children are often the hidden victims, and we don't always do enough to support them through trauma like this. Romeca's case is a tragedy, but it's also potentially a lesson about how justice sometimes requires community advocacy, about how systems can fail when we don't demand accountability, about how violence might be preventable if we intervene early and effectively. The documents are out, the indictment is filed, the trial will come, and perhaps Holly Johnson will spend decades in prison. But that won't bring Romeca back. It won't heal her son. It won't fix the systemic issues that allowed a 113-day delay. Justice, when it comes, will be imperfect, because in cases like this, perfect justice is impossible. December 30th, 2025. After 113 days of waiting, fighting, and refusing to stay silent, the documents finally dropped. Case number 26CR01950001. The people of the state of Illinois versus Quadajah Johnson. First-degree murder. The documents tell us what Holly is accused of. The evidence will tell us what prosecutors believe they can prove. The trial will determine what a jury believes happened in that school parking lot on September 8th. But what the documents can't tell us is why it took so long. Why a family had to bury their daughter while reportedly her killer walked free for months. Why it took rallies and protests and a community refusing to stay silent to see charges filed. Romeca Meeks Blackman was 31 years old. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and on a Monday morning in September, she dropped her son off at school and never came home. 113. Days later, formal charges were filed. Not because the system automatically worked as designed, but because people demanded accountability. January 7th. 6 days from now, Holly will appear in court. The next chapter begins, and we'll be watching every step. If you want to follow this case, when Holly's trial starts, when the verdict comes down, when we learn how justice is ultimately served, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because I'll be covering every significant court appearance, every major development, every turn in this case until it's resolved. Romeca's story deserves to be followed through to the end. And if cases like this matter to you, cases where documents, evidence, and investigations reveal the truth, check out my playlist, One Mistake That Cracked the Case. These are the stories of how justice eventually catches up. The forensic breakthroughs, the investigative persistence, the moments when the truth finally comes to light. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Holly's self-defense claim has any chance of succeeding? Or do you believe this is a clear case for conviction? Do you think Carlos Smith bears any responsibility? What should justice look like in a case like this? I read every comment, and I want to hear your perspective. If this case matters to you, share this video. Share it with someone who cares about accountability. Share it with someone who needs to understand that communities have power when they organize and speak up. Romeca Meeks Blackman's name deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim in a case file, but as a person, a woman who loved her son, who had a life, dreams, and people who cherished her. Justice for Romeca isn't just about convicting Holly Johnson. It's about acknowledging that what happened on September 8th was tragic and unacceptable. The documents are out. The truth is emerging. And on January 7th, we take the next step. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And, most of all, thank you for remembering Romeca. Next court date, January 7th, 2026, 9 a.m. Courtroom 101, Cook County Criminal Court. Judge, Honorable Erica L. Reddick. See you on the 7th.